The Australian Curriculum Studies Association would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands and the waterways from where we are all meeting today. We pay our respects to the elders past and present, and we extend our respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. We value the contributions of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples to education and their continued support of the teaching and learning of all Australians. We recognise that for thousands of years, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples have been the first teachers, and that we are committed to continue our learning alongside them.
Welcome back, everyone, to our next episode of AXA Insights, where we are looking at a specific area in education, that of gifted and talented and sort of inclusive learning environments for our students today. We are delighted today to welcome Kylie Bice, who is the owner and educational consultant of Growing Up Greatness, which is an organisation that helps support the needs of many students with diverse learning needs, which help them create inclusive environments of which they can thrive in. Now, Kylie has worked extensively across Australia, but also in Indonesia, and works closely with colleagues over in the US. She has held positions on many boards, many state boards and national boards, and has worked across all education sectors, supporting students and schools and administration teams with a wide range of challenges that many of our students and teachers are facing today. So welcome, Kylie.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to be here.
Now, we're going to jump into this first question straight away, and it's kind of one of those ones that we know the current educational landscape is quite complex at the moment, and I think the media is very quick to portray this huge influx of diagnoses in children and those with complex learning needs, and we know that really this is down to the structures and testing and educational understanding that is helping to identify these needs earlier. And we know that early intervention is the key, but this can have quite the knock-on effect to those on the ground who are really feeling overwhelmed and concerned about their abilities to teach students in the best way. So I think the first one is really, you're going into a school. What is the first thing you would do to reassure a teacher that they're ready for this journey ahead?
Yeah, I think that is really tricky because I work with, early career teachers as well as very experienced teachers.
Yes.
And every teacher, it doesn't matter how experienced or new they are. And I have a long background of teaching in the classroom, so I appreciate what that feels like. But at some point, every teacher feels overwhelmed, feels disillusioned, is at their maximum in terms of energy and time that they have available to them. So I think the first thing I find teachers really respond to is to acknowledge how busy they are, actually.
Yes.
I think sometimes teachers, especially when someone comes to their school or to talk to them from outside the school, someone that they don't know, and which is often what I do these days, just to say, I've been a teacher, I see you, I see how hard you're working. I know how hard this is. Even little things like acknowledging the time of the year. I know it's a couple of weeks away from report deadlines. You must have a lot of marking at the moment. Just little things like that, I think, makes a teacher go, oh, okay. This person gets it. And it's also, I think, normalizes. I don't want it to be normal that teachers feel that exhausted, but I think it is good for them to have a little moment of thinking, oh, it's not just me.
Yes.
So whenever I work with teachers, I always try to have a win in terms of workload. I don't want to ever work with a teacher or a group of teachers and go away from them and they're overwhelmed and think, well, now there's even more we have to do. We can't do it. I want them to have a win. I want them to feel as though we've maybe had a conversation to reduce their marking load a little bit, or talked about a strategy that might make their lives a bit easier in the classroom or with a particular student. So, I think acknowledging how hard teachers are working and how invested they are in their jobs is always the first starting point. I think we have to start there.
It is. It's very true. I think that confidence building, and, we've just discussed before we started about, I think with a lot of teachers, they know that there is more that they could do, or they're aware, especially in a case of maybe with a child who's consistently an A student, and whilst they know that's great, it's like, well, how do I do the best for that student? And so I suppose it is about that confidence and sort of saying to them, you're doing great, but I'm here to help.
Yeah, and I feel like teachers get a lot of messages in the media and even at their own schools sometimes, not that school leaders are trying to send a negative message, but sometimes I feel like teachers get a lot of messages that teachers aren't doing enough. They're not doing the right thing. They're not teaching the right way. And when they go to another meeting or a professional learning event at their school that says, right, here's another thing you need to put into your practice, I think a lot of teachers feel as though, can someone just tell me I'm doing okay? Like just, so yeah, I think
definitely.
that is difficult.
And I think, we're trained to come out of teacher education, and that first part of the EITSL is, know your students. And I think that's as well from an administration point, know your staff as well and their capabilities. And, that's sort of really true to the heart of why we're in the profession, I think. But we sort of look at these words, and obviously the word gifted, the terminology is often used, especially as we discussed over here in the West, but there are often many complexities that surround a word, or definitely a child who's given a label of gifted and talented. And again, there's this term of 2E or twice exceptional. And could you give us a bit of a lowdown on some of that terminology and break it down so we can get a little bit more of a grasp of what they mean?
Yes, the terminology is tricky, and I know I'm based in Western Australia. In Western Australia, the terminology of gifted and talented is very much used. It's very much the norm. But I am aware in the eastern states, in New South Wales and other states, that gifted and talented is not the terminology that's used and sometimes frowned upon for various reasons. And other words like high potential, high performance are used, and lots of other words. Some schools, in their effort to avoid the words gifted and talented, will call their program something that they have made up, and that's okay too. I feel as though it's okay to have different terminology as long as we know what that terminology actually means. And I think some of the problems with that is that in the research, very much, we still hear the words gifted and talented a lot. And when parents are doing research, then they're the words that they hear. And so when schools are using other words, sometimes to parents, they will interpret that as, well, you're not doing anything for gifted and talented students because I can't see those words on your website or in your policies. So I often have conversations with schools around terminology and this debate around, it's okay to call something else, but at some point you have to define it and use the words that parents understand and use the words that teachers understand, and make sure that if you're going to have new terminology or different terminology, that definitions for that are very clear. Even you mentioned twice exceptional as well. So twice exceptionality is when students are gifted and they also have a disability, so two exceptionalities. Again, in Western Australia and lots of states, twice exceptionality or dual or multi-exceptionality is very accepted terminology. But again, I'm aware in other states of Australia, words such as gifted learning disabled, so GLD, is the phrase that's more often used. Again, I think terminology is not the thing to get hung up on, but that's because I want teachers to know who are we talking about, not what is the right word. But I do appreciate that we need to make sure that terminology, we all have a shared understanding, particularly within a school community when parents are looking for certain services and when we're asking teachers to implement certain practices. We want that terminology to be clear.
I think you really hit the nail on the head, especially in that view of it being a community. And we know, I think a lot of schools might have that trepidation of giving a child something like that, and then the expectation of a parent. So if we don't do that, then the parent won't have, that dialogue won't be there. And I think also that expectation that if the child doesn't succeed, that somehow there is an accountability. And it really is, as you're saying, it's about the needs of that child. And, as long as we are very clear in our comprehension and understanding of what some of those mean, majority of parents are always very happy to engage in that conversation,
Yes.
They're
and this is assuming, sorry to interrupt you, I think this is assuming, and parents do often come with quite a clear understanding if they've done their own research, their own homework. But it still remains the truth that a lot of teachers and school leaders have misunderstandings about the words,
Yes.
regardless of which words we use, that there are still teachers and school leaders who feel that gifted maybe doesn't exist, or that gifted means that you're a very compliant, well-behaved, polite, organised child, which we know is not always the case. So it I it becomes problematic, I think, when people within the gifted field debate terminology, because I feel like that conversation takes away a little bit from let's work together to raise awareness.
Definitely,
Yeah.
100%. I really believe, what you're saying there. But so it's a funny thing, isn't it? We, as a teacher, having, it often lands on your desk. There's an educational psych report, what we often call ed psych reports, and you know, they are mind-baffling. They can be tens of pages long, and tests that have been done that you have never had experience of looking at before. You don't actually know how to interpret them, and then you'll sort of skip to the back page, and there's this list of recommendations. But often that means you're engaging with a sort of a psychologist, you're engaging with a speech therapist, an occupational therapist, a physiotherapist, and so this overwhelm, and you're expected to digest it quickly and get it in there. And I don't think many teachers would feel that they have the confidence to do and understand that effectively. So I guess that's where you must come in. And, what are some of those strategies and systems that you can help build within a school to help support a teacher's capability?
Yeah, and I think this is where I talk to schools a lot about differentiation on the one hand, because in Australia, and particularly in Western Australia, we have the majority of our classrooms have gifted students in amongst a mixed ability classroom. So there are teachers, certainly in many primary and high schools in WA and across other states, that when they hear the word gifted, will often have the response of, well, that should be a good thing. I can forget about that child because I've got all these other kids to worry about who are more immediate. But then, of course, we also want to talk about gifted strategies so that we can actually say, as well as differentiating and catering for that range that you've got in your classroom, let's talk about what are the specific strategies that are going to work for gifted children, whether they are in a standalone gifted classroom or whether they are individual students within a mixed ability class. So differentiation, I think, becomes a hugely important strategy. Again, I'm aware that can become controversial as well, particularly when we talk about explicit instruction.
Yes.
Which often explicit instruction and differentiation are seen as opposite camps in terms of strategy. I'm really aware of that. I was trained in explicit instruction. I'm very aware it's an excellent research-based strategy.
Yes.
When it's done well for the right students, it's a very important strategy. The tricky part of that is that it's not, there's a lot of research that shows that it's not necessarily the right strategy for gifted children. And that becomes difficult and confusing for teachers when they're being asked to teach their class with a particular strategy or program. They've been trained in that program, and often the training will say you must do the program this way for your whole class. And that's not bad information for certain children in the class, or maybe in some schools for the majority of a class. But if you've got a gifted child who perhaps knows the content already that's being taught explicitly, a child who's maybe a year or more ahead in that content, a child maybe who maybe didn't know the content, but they picked it up very quickly, whereas in the explicit instruction model, a teacher needs to make sure that they're continuing to go back, do all the structured explicit practice that the gifted child might not need. And so it's not that explicit instruction is bad or wrong or anything like that. It's very important, but we have to be asking in schools, how do we make sure that we are applying explicit instruction or any other model or program in such a way that the right students are getting what they need, and gifted students who might need something different are getting what they need. So as an example, a pre-primary year one classroom might sit their whole class down on the mat to do an explicit lesson. And it's, say, a phonics lesson, for example. But if you've got a gifted child in that room who they already have all their alphabet, their sounds, their reading, their writing, they're needing something that's beyond that, we really have to ask, what is the or the learning purpose of that child sitting on the mat rehearsing phonics.
And
So I think
you're
that
right as
becomes the
well.
problem.
Yeah, and often some of those children don't even go to phonics. They go straight from what we see as, oh, you weren't reading. Oh, now you're reading. And that
Yes,
sort of thing. And they don't actually
yes,
require the phonic knowledge to get to a
yes,
point where
yes.
they're at.
And sometimes teachers will say, oh, yes, but that gifted child, I noticed that he still doesn't know these two sounds, or
Yes.
he still is not comprehending well. So he really should sit in that phonics
Mm,
lesson um, so that we can catch up those couple of things. But really, for that child, we need a different set of strategies for that child to fill that gap, rather than say, because there's one gap, they need to be sitting through the whole process every day. Um,
yes.
but I appreciate that a primary teacher, a year one teacher, will say, well, yeah, but I've got year ones in front of me.
Mm,
What am I supposed to do while
yes.
I've got most of the kids on the mat? What do I do with that one child? Or what, so we need
And
to make sure that teachers have those strategies in classrooms in terms of routines, managing
yeah.
behavior, the differentiation strategies, so that they feel confident that they can provide different options for different students.
And I wonder about that because, I think there's a tendency to then give children independent work and send them off to go, oh, they're very capable, so
Yes,
they can go and do a project
yes,
on XYZ. And there's
yes,
maybe a tendency, therefore, to assume that a gifted child has that innate ability and kind of wants to suddenly learn about something within that,
yes,
what to kind of complement, which I think, unfortunately, then doesn't provide the guidance that maybe they
exactly.
necessarily need. Yeah.
Yes. And then we have a situation where a gifted student is constantly, at the side of the room doing their own work.
Yes.
And that might work if a child innately has some independent
Mm.
skills. Um, but if they don't, then you're right, they're going to need direct teaching. And even if they do have those independent skills, they still have the right to have
Yes.
that direct teaching. And also, education is designed to be collaborative. Kids are meant to be with other children learning at
Yes.
the same level. And if you've got one little soul that's constantly isolated from everyone else, academically, what that's going to mean is they're probably isolated socially as well.
Yes. Yes.
And then where are their collaborators? And so
Yeah.
that's where we need to make sure as well that we are always considering strategies like acceleration where that's
Mm.
appropriate for some gifted children, and making sure that a school has a range of strategies that are available to gifted children. um, I I hear as well that a lot of teachers, you talked about independence.
Mm.
For example, I was asked to do a session at a school one day with some primary teachers, and at the end of the session, I was talking about strategies for gifted children. I had one poor graduate teacher, a young lady, who burst into tears, and I thought, oh no, what have I done? And she said, I really loved everything that you said, and I know exactly which students in the class need those strategies from me.
Yeah.
But in my classroom, I have, three students on the
Mm.
autism spectrum. I'm managing behaviors. I've got a little
Mm.
boy that doesn't talk yet. I've got all these
Yeah.
other things going on, and I'm still learning. And I just don't know how to implement the strategies you talked about when I don't have the strategies yet for those other children
Yes.
that are taking up more of my time in the immediate, the behaviors are immediate,
Yes.
those kind of things. So I do talk a lot to teachers about teaching independence,
Yes.
because teachers will say to me over and over again in a mixed ability class, I feel like I can't cater well for the gifted children
Yeah.
and go over and teach them because I feel like I have to be with the weaker children all the
Yeah.
time.
And it's
And so we
interesting,
have
is
to
it?
resolve that. We have to
Yeah.
teach teachers how to teach independent skills to the weaker children
Yeah.
and make sure they're doing the work that's appropriate so they can work independently,
Yeah.
so that they can get to the gifted students. Otherwise,
And
we
what?
have a situation where our weaker students don't learn any
No.
independence, and our gifted
Ex-
students become hyper independent and then think that it's normal to never need the teacher, to never ask a question, to never need help, which is not good for either group.
no. And you're just really focusing on that middle to get you, that kind of, and then the outliers, you sort of have those bits. And what's very interesting, and in my own experience, is when you do have children who are doing very well, often when you give them that autonomy to maybe help others or to be part of a conversation where they feel that they're contributing significantly to someone else's learning, you often see huge, great results because you're also developing those social skills, which you say, rather than the isolation, you're actually getting children coming together who are acknowledging each other's strengths and sort of saying, oh, this is what to do, or this is how to help you. So I think there's a real power in some of those elements.
Absolutely. But we want to make sure as well that our gifted students are not always asked to be the mini teacher in the classroom as well.
Yes.
That when they're helping other students, they're not dumbing themselves down, if that makes sense, because they're not training to be a teacher, but we want to create environments where they're with like-minded peers and intellectual peers that they can do that peer tutoring in a way that's really meaningful for them. So yes, it's important that we get those social skills happening, but that needs to happen with intellectual peers. It's very difficult for a child to engage appropriately, either academically or socially, with kids who are not intellectual peers. It doesn't help their social skills. So it's a tricky one when a teacher is just teaching who they've got in a classroom.
And it's understanding the child and nuances and what they need at what point, and it's very different according to the day itself as well. If you think about that day from 8:30 to 3:00, the difference in what's required throughout the day, whether it's a recess, whether it's a maths lesson, or it's very complex. And as we're saying, as teachers, there's a lot to go on. But I think, and we're talking about this obviously from the curriculum perspective as well. This is where we sit, but curriculums can often be viewed and very much enacted in quite literal and rigid forms, which unfortunately makes it very difficult to adapt to the needs of students, and especially with the case of gifted and talented students. So what is the best way to help adapt that curriculum to their needs?
Fabulous question. I think the first part of that answer has to be that teachers need to first feel they have permission to adapt.
Yes.
Because I think that is what I find over and over, the biggest barrier that I hear constantly, that teachers will say, we don't think we're allowed to adapt. You can see their eyes getting wide and then getting worried. You think, oh, adapt? Am I allowed to do that? How am I allowed to do that? I don't think I'm allowed to do that. So, and then school leaders sometimes will reinforce that. No, stick to your program. Don't change anything. Don't change the assessments. Don't change the plan. And so teachers, I think, get very nervous about the word adapt. So I think that's the first part. We have to say to teachers, please adapt. I want to see evidence of your adaptations. I want to see a program or a daily work pad or whatever it is that has got scribbles on it, that you've changed things, that you've acknowledge that, I didn't need to maybe spend as long on this concept as I'd planned, or I need to spend longer on this concept, or some students in my class need to spend longer on this concept and other students in my class are ready for something that's more advanced. So that instead of asking teachers for their program that is set in stone and they feel as though they can't move from it, we're instead asking teachers to reflect on programs and value the changes they've made to programs. I think the other part of that as well is acknowledging that the Australian curriculum was originally written to be on a scale, and it's very clear still on the ACARA websites of the Australian curriculum that teachers very much have permission to look up and down the curriculum. What we want, of course, is teachers to start with their year level curriculum, but then what we need from there is really good teachers who have good data skills, who are collecting, particularly for gifted children. We want teachers who are collecting pre-assessment data, who are doing off-level testing. So if children are, if the data they've got, for example, is standardized data, but you've got a gifted child who's hitting the ceiling of that, that doesn't give teachers enough information to know how to adapt the curriculum because it hasn't given them information about what the child still might know but hasn't been asked. So asking those off-level questions, collecting that pre-assessment data so that teachers feel confident that they've got evidence to say, yes, this is the year 4 curriculum or the year 8 curriculum, but this child is demonstrating that they know this already, that they're working above this. Therefore, I can tick that off and I can look at what is curriculum or learning that's going to be more appropriate for this child.
Definitely. I think that's a really crucial point you're making, is about that data and the evidence and the collection of that, because I
Yeah.
think that is a really one of those things where you, as you're saying, that ceiling data where the child has reached the top,
Yeah.
therefore job done. And then again, that adaptation, where do I go next to find another measurement that I can use? We get quite
Yes.
fixated on certain measurement scales, and whether that is NAPLAN or PAT testing or whatever it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
And we want to look at like-minded schools, but then we actually lose sense of the child in that process. So all of
Yes.
your class got to this stage, therefore you're a collective.
Yes.
And so,
And so I
and we
often
also,
talk to schools on that note about
mm,
the different ways that we need to look at data. So standardized testing,
yes,
for example, a lot of schools have a lot of standardized testing data.
mm,
But I often talk to schools about there are two ways we can look at that kind of data. There's sort of a global way that we look at it, and then an
mm,
individual student way that we look at it. So
yes,
often schools are looking at that data as a global. How well is our school doing? How
mm,
well are certain classes or learning areas
yeah,
doing? And then teachers then tend to look at it globally too. So they'll look at the data for their class and say, oh, I've got 3 strong kids. That's nice to know, and kind of stop
yes,
there. Um,
yeah,
but what we need to be training teachers to do is to look at data as an individual. What is the
yes,
individual information about the students that I have in front of me? How can I maybe group some of those students together?
mm,
What learning do they therefore need? What extra information do I need? And so I think there's a real message here for middle leaders
mm,
and school principals that it's please have your global data conversations up at that level of leadership,
yes,
but please don't have those global conversations with teachers. That's not the PD they need around data.
no,
Teachers need time to sit with their data and actually plan for their class. Who needs what based on this
exactly,
data, and how will I measure growth based on this data? So really important for leaders and middle leaders that we're not spending professional learning time saying this
mm,
is how well our school did, because that's nice, but it
yeah,
will not help teachers cater better for students
no.
tomorrow or next week.
And exactly that. And I think that's one of the issues we do find a lot, is that that teachers themselves understanding data and looking at the analysis is often quite
Mm.
confronting, and they don't
Yes.
understand. You're just being told that,
Yeah.
oh, your percentage, and we all know a mean average,
Yeah.
great. But then you could look at, say, I mean, I specifically always like the pat testing, because I see that box and whisker chart, and I could see where and what I had to do to then change and bring together. But I think there is not enough time sometimes spent on that and
I
actually
think time is,
understanding the data.
yes. Yeah. And I think
Yeah,
if schools are looking for good ways to spend their student free time, their professional
yeah,
learning time, giving the teachers time to sit and to coach them around how to look at their data. What does it mean? How
yes,
can they use that data to plan for this term that's coming up? That's really powerful time spent with teachers to teach them how to engage with that, because otherwise I think teachers always feel like they're not doing well enough when they just look at global
no,
data. They see their data and they think, oh no, I've still got these 10 children who are very weak and they're not hitting the
yes,
benchmarks. So really important that we start to say to teachers, how do we measure growth? Because
yes,
then teachers can celebrate some of those weaker students and the growth they're making, even if they're still not hitting benchmarks. But
yes,
also that keeps teachers and schools accountable for the growth that gifted students are
definitely.
or may not be making. And then that's when conversations get really interesting, when teachers say, actually, I'm doing better than I thought with my weaker kids, but my gifted kids aren't moving.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, when you get teachers and schools going, please share with me the strategies,
yes,
because I'm focusing on growth rather than focusing on the profile of my class.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's where that meshes in, isn't it? That kind of where we're seeing the educational psych report adds that extra layer to support some of those children, that that higher end, to be going
Yeah.
like, oh,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
I've got this data from somewhere else, so I'm bringing it all in together. And that
Yeah.
ability to do that, and that needs support and guidance, especially for early
Yeah.
career teachers. But
Yeah.
we're often seeing, and we've mentioned this before, about programs and also pedagogies that are put into schools, and for very valid reasons, but they might not be suitable for all the students. We haven't got a one size fits all,
Yeah.
and there's some children who are incredibly capable only in specific learning areas. So what I guess sort of the question I'm sort of asking is, what must we be cautious about when we're faced with these challenges of following a program, but intrinsically knowing this might not be best for this child?
Yeah. I'm convinced that it's true that no one program, model, commercial product is ever going to work for every student.
Yes.
We are lucky in Australia. We have a lot of fantastic commercial products and programs out there that have a good research base, that really help teachers to cater for certain students. So
yes,
that is a good thing. And it's a great thing when schools are investing in those programs. But what I would say to schools is it's really important that we don't train teachers on a particular program at the expense of differentiation skills. Sometimes or often it becomes a black and white, and teachers go to the training for the program and they hear, not, I don't think they would say don't differentiate that, but they're just interested in their program and training their program. So they would say,
yes,
here's exactly how to run this program. But at schools, there's a responsibility to say, that's great, take that training, that's important. But how do we make sure that we embed that training into what the other things we know in teaching are important practices? Even I worked with a school once a couple of years ago that I had been working with them for a couple of years on differentiation. They'd made a lot of growth in that area. And then I was just about to start a third year, and they had implemented or decided to purchase and implement, do training on a particular literacy a commercial product. Great product, nothing wrong with the product. But suddenly teachers were very stressed. Suddenly, which is understandable. Teachers, of course, get stressed when there's something new. But what really became apparent, and it took me a while to realize, because I was going in and doing my differentiation thing that I had been asked to do, not realizing that they had all been trained now on this other thing. And eventually a couple of teachers said, we actually don't know how to implement the strategies you're talking about anymore because we've been told we have to teach literacy this way now.
yes.
And I was like, oh, okay, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So and we just needed to go back and have a conversation with leadership, say, all right, so you've got this new program, that's fine. You've obviously implemented that for a reason. But we have to talk about that program and the work you've been doing on differentiation together and talk to teachers about how those two things can be implemented together. And I think often schools do that in general, that very keep all the strategies quite pigeonholed. And so teachers go to a training about this for numeracy and a training about this for literacy. And then they're, getting this information over here for this thing. And then differentiation just becomes another thing, or gifted strategies just become another thing. So I am often saying to schools, if you're going to implement something new, please talk about it in the context of what you have previously been doing that you want to continue. Because teachers, when they're stressed and busy, of course they will pigeonhole. And we don't want to put teachers in a position where they feel they have to choose between two good strategies. Because either they feel they're supposed to choose, or because they're too busy and they don't understand how they go together. So they have to choose just from a practical point of view.
And I think that devalues the capabilities of our profession when we do that sometimes. And I think we've seen programs, which, as you're saying, there's some brilliant programs out there, but what we often see is a 3-tier. Oh, that's 1A, that's 1B, that's 1C. And you put these children again into the pigeonholes. And sometimes, especially with gifted and I think twice exceptional children, they'll often be put in that 1A group, but because they haven't got full skill set, oh, they're not performing, so we'll move them. And it's actually, I think in certain programs like that as well, just because, say you, for an example, a maths program, just because you put it into a word sentence, it suddenly makes it different or changes the complexity. And I think sometimes we rely on other skills, say a literacy skill for that child, so therefore has to have that skill to be able to. And we can get a little bit caught up in the effectiveness of some of those assessments, even within those programs. And therefore, sometimes we miss a lot of children, I think, going through the system.
Yes, I know. I actually just was at a school the other day that they asked me while I was there to do some professional learning on gifted education. And one teacher said, I really want to ask you about a little boy in my classroom who they were doing Bright Path assessments. Bright Path is fantastic.
Yes.
They were doing Bright Path assessment, and they said he is very, very bright. There's so much of this that he knows, but he really hates writing, and we think there's maybe an undiagnosed, like a dyslexia maybe, or something like that. And so he just avoids the writing, but he knows how to spell it all. He comprehends, he can read, he comprehends the text. And so they felt as though because he didn't engage with the physical written nature of the Bright Path assessment on that day, that he was going to be pigeonholed to get the wrong strategies.
Yeah.
When they were saying we're not sure how to advocate for him, that actually it was just that assessment wasn't the right assessment for him on that day. We love Bright Path most of the time, but for this kid on that day, it just wasn't working.
Yes.
And so are we allowed to do something different when they felt they were being told, no, if the Bright Path assessment says he couldn't do this, then that's what we have to do. And it's tricky when kids are twice exceptional, because the research is very clear that for twice exceptional students, the best strategy is to treat them as if they are gifted first, and then support them for their weakness, rather than you'll never get access to gifted services or appropriate learning until we've filled all those gaps and somehow fixed you. So while I would completely understand why a Bright Path trainer would say, no, of course you must go on that assessment on that day. Yes, that will tell us about his weaknesses, and they already know about that. But it's important for a child like that doesn't fit into the box. It doesn't fit into the, the difficult, student who's having difficulty box. It doesn't quite fit into the student who's gifted box, that we look for a different way. And I think, again, that comes back to teachers feeling that they can adapt, and that they have permission, that when the program they've been trained in or told to do is not working for a child, that they respond to that, rather than being always feeling I have to just continue with this practice even though it's not right. I can see I'm losing this kid. I can see this, that this child needs other strategies. And it's tricky. I think, to come back to your very first question, when teachers hear a lot in the media and from schools that, no, you're not doing the right thing, you must do it this way. Yes, teachers need that training, but I think they also need a clear message that says, use this as part of your education training and your data about students. Use it when it works. And if you've got particular students that it doesn't fit, do something different, and that's okay.
And that's such an important part, I think, as well, of school culture as well. If you, and the fact that a school wouldn't have you in knows that they're saying, okay, guys, we're actually investing because we know that we really want to cater for every child. But the fact that then they give the autonomy to a teacher to say, I'm seeing something different, I'm advocating. And that's what every single teacher, you could ask any teacher. And the whole point is they're there because of the children, and they're there because the students.
And we want them
to succeed.
Yes. And I think as long as they're advocating and adapting based on data, then that's what we want good teachers to do. And I do feel that that's why we are losing teachers, is because teachers get demoralized when they can see that certain strategies or the way they've been told to do things are not working for certain kids, and yet they are told to do it anyway, or they feel they have to do it anyway. And I think that's when teachers leave, because I think teachers actually, I see teachers managing a huge amount of stress and workload, but when they're invested and they're inspired and they feel that they're backed up by their leaders.
Exactly, backed up.
They can manage that stress and workload. But when teachers are stressed and have a big workload, and they feel they're letting kids down and they've got no choice, they can't change anything for certain children, I think that's when they think, well, it's not worth it. The stress and the workload, the marking on the weekend, the planning, it's not worth it if I can't actually do the right thing by that child.
Very much so. And, we talk about data, and I think some teachers are drowning in data, and data that isn't meaningful for that child. And, we talk about also that gut instinct. I remember saying to staff, like, you will know quite instinctively a child's capabilities, and you have to go and trust that and use the data to reinforce your instinct on that.
That's right.
Sometimes there will be, majority of the time, it'll be very, it'll coincide, but there will be those anomalies where you go, I didn't see that. And that's when we use data effectively to say, oh, I missed that. But if we're swamped in more and more and more data, we're muddying the waters and saying, well, they've scored this on this, they scored this on this, and actually they were having a bad day there. So we're sort of not giving confidence again to our teachers to know their students.
Yeah, and I feel because teachers are in our effort as a country to sort of raise the standards of teaching. I shouldn't do this actually, because I want teachers to be wonderful too. I want to raise standards too. But I feel in the effort to do that, teachers get given a lot of prescribed programs. And so I see a lot of teachers now that have either lost the ability or the confidence, or they never had it in the first place to do things like program. I just see a lot of teachers now that just, they don't know how to write a program. They don't know how to program. They don't know how to use their data. They don't know how to measure growth. They don't know how to plan lessons because they're being given so many products that tell them the lesson for them, that write the program for them. And on the one hand, a lot of teachers would say, don't take that away from me. That's really important in terms of saving me time. But another experienced teacher will say, I can't do it this way. I need to be able to adapt to be a good teacher. So I feel like in our effort to upskill teachers, that we, and when I say we, I think I mean me and government and whoever else trains teachers, need to differentiate for teachers, because a graduate teacher or a teacher who's struggling, a teacher who perhaps is not doing well and doesn't have the skills, may need a structured program.
Yes.
But a teacher who is very experienced, who gets good results, is probably not just using a structured program. They're doing other things. They're adapting. They're using their data to advocate for kids and do something different. So I feel like when we give commercial products, we're not differentiating for the different needs of teachers. We're doing exactly the same thing to teachers as we are to students, and just saying we're going to assume you're all the same and you all need the same support and structures.
And that's very important when we look at teacher education programs, and we're sort of looking at more specifically with early career teachers, because you've been trained, you've probably done an element of programming because you've had to fulfill that in your teacher training, and then all of those skills that you've really worked hard to achieve at teacher training at various different universities. You're all going to different places. Then you go and told, oh, okay, this is what you need to do. So it's very different. But unfortunately, when we look at this, gifted and talented education, or twice exceptional, is maybe one lesson in teacher training. It might be.
I know.
It might be like
one lesson for some. Yeah.
And it's so small, and you think, oh my goodness, then I've got to go into a classroom and I'm taking everything on.
Yes.
I've only scratched the surface of this area. What do I do next? I mean, how do I go to my admin team and say, I've identified these things. I can't quite pinpoint it, but I know I need some more support with this child.
Yeah, and I think that's tricky. I think there's so many teachers that I meet are very compliant beings. It's lovely. You know, they want to do the right thing.
Yes.
They're there to do the right thing by students. Often they're compliant. They want to do the right thing and not get in trouble. A lot of teachers say to me, just quietly, they'll say, oh, I won't be doing that when I go back to school because I will get told off. And often I'll say, what do you mean by getting told off? And I suspect for some teachers, they've been very kindly spoken to, but it felt like a telling off. But I also suspect that for other teachers, they have really felt as though someone has said, no, you've done the wrong thing. Go back, get back in your box. Don't think, just do. Do what we asked you. And I don't know, that makes me really sad for teachers. I feel like, we're just not doing well. We're focusing so much on the skills that they need that we're not doing well on building their confidence, their autonomy, their ability to be confident in their data and evidence-based decisions. I think sometimes schools get nervous because they're worried that if you give teachers too much autonomy, they're going to go rogue, and then they're not going to be teaching to the curriculum. And I've had schools who've said, no, we've pulled everything back because we had a situation where teachers were teaching off curriculum. They were actually genuinely not quite doing the right thing. But that's okay. There's a time to pull back. But if schools pull back and then never move, I think that's not helpful either. We want teachers not to go rogue, but to absolutely feel confident in how to make their own decisions based on data, and to feel as though when someone in leadership's asked them, why did you change that? Why did you change your program? Or why aren't you keeping up with the other class? Or why are you ahead of the other class? Or why is this student doing that thing? That a teacher doesn't hear that as being told off. They hear that as an opportunity to say, let me talk to you about my data.
Yes, exactly. And when you were sort of talking about that, I just thought back to leaderships I've worked with or leadership I've worked in. And one specific one rang out to me. And I remember her being very, she said, if you come to me with a problem and you haven't thought of three solutions or
Yeah,
in a way of helping, you're
yeah,
not going to get anything from me. I will tell you, I've taken that on
yeah,
board. Thank you very much. But if you come to me with something that's going wrong and you say, it's not right, but I've got some options.
yeah,
Will you support me or will you give me some extra training in XYZ? She said, I will wholeheartedly say, I've got this. Yeah. She said, but
yeah,
I'm, and another one had also said, if you are an admin person and every day someone gives you their jumper, offload the problem, offload. All that happens is you're wearing very lots of jumpers and you're very hot. But if someone comes to you and says, I've got this idea, I want to do it,
yeah,
then I
yeah.
think, the majority of admin teams will say, I
I
trust you,
think
go
so
away and do it.
too. And so often I'm working with a school and a teacher will say to me, we're not allowed to do that here. And I will quietly go back to leadership because they're the ones that, ask me to be there and say, a teacher said they didn't feel they were allowed to do this. Is that true? Is that a rule? And so often the leadership will be so surprised, say, no, that's not a
Yes.
rule. Why do they think that's a
Yeah.
rule? So just that clear communication. I'm
Hmm.
forever coaching leaders, school leaders, to use the words, I give you permission
Permission.
to, uh, just so that teachers hear it really clearly. Because when they're busy and they're sitting in a meeting at the end of the week and they're tired, they're
Yeah.
probably not hearing the
Mm.
messages clearly if you're talking
Yes.
roundabout. So, it's really important that we're clear. And also, I love that about the come with solutions. I had a principal who said that to me
Mm.
as well. Like,
Yeah.
you've always got to come to me with a solution.
Yeah.
But for teachers, perhaps who are younger or who are not sure, they don't
Mm.
have the solution. I think it is really important as well that when they say, I'm not sure how to cater for these couple of students in my classroom, can you help me? Can I go to some
Mm.
training? That schools are
Yeah.
responding to that where possible.
Yes.
I have sometimes heard a school say, no, no, I'm, our focus this year is on something else. So you can't go to any PD this year on gifted. And I
Yeah.
understand that schools have budgets and priorities, and that's very appropriate. Uh, but I think it's so important if a teacher has decided they're ready to
Mm.
ask for help, that in that moment that we at least have a go at something. It might not be something that costs a lot.
Yes.
It might just be, hey, let's give this person a call and you can sit and have a Zoom conversation with
Mm.
them or a phone call, or, let's go and do some research ourselves, or let me see if I can find a resource for you and I'll, see if I can bring it to you on Monday, or just something like that,
Yes.
so that teachers feel as though asking for help is a good thing, is a valued thing. Because that graduate teacher who asked for help and was told that's not a school priority is not going to ask for help again.
Yeah.
So
And
yeah,
there's so many facets to, we talked about this before, like education plans or meetings with external providers, with parents. And it is really helpful if you have those tools and you're armed ready to have those conversations with
yes,
terminology, with
yes,
strategies. And sometimes that is one of the biggest things for teachers, I think, it's facing, because they go in with such trepidation to a meeting that could really have such great positive outcomes.
yes,
But I'm actually terrified to say anything. I don't want to go there. I might get it
yes,
wrong. And I think the more we arm people with some of those ideas and what they're doing, it makes for such better. And communication, as you said before,
yes,
the
yes.
key is communication.
And really, what we're talking about now is great school leaders, aren't we? And
Mm,
they're
yeah,
absolutely out there, those great school leaders that um, know how to have that balance of being approachable, but also to set really clear boundaries
yeah,
and expectations, where teachers feel that they can come and have conversations, that they are supported. And it's
yes.
so interesting. I visit so many different schools,
Hmm.
and I swear I can feel, I'm not really the feely kind of person, but it's an
No,
amazing thing when you walk into a staff room, the difference between, even when I've never been to that school before, the difference
yes.
between a staff that wanders into the staff room for this session, that is a positive staff, that
Hmm.
gets along well, that feels supported, they're excited to learn, versus walking into a staff room where people are grumbling and people are, and
Exhausted,
I've
yeah.
learned it's not about the time of the year. Like, there are some
No,
times of the year when every staff member is tired,
yeah.
but you can still feel the difference. There's tired and
Yes,
happy, and there's tired and we're over it.
yeah.
And that really does come down to
And
school leaders. And thankfully, there are some wonderful school leaders out there.
And that is exactly, I think you summed that up so well, because I had exactly the same as going in as consultant. But even that opening of the doors, the people on the front desk, the whole idea, I think we forget the notion of from the groundsman to the cleaning staff to the front staff to all of the support services. It is culturally, if it's a safe place, our
Yes.
children will thrive. And whether
And I
that's
love that you use
everybody's
the word
engaged.
safe, because often I say to teachers, your kids need to feel safe in your room,
Yes.
and it's the same for the grown-ups. They need to
Mm.
feel safe in their school environment, don't they?
Definitely. Now we talk about some of these children, and it's I think it's growing awareness, especially in media, but in general conversation, that for a lot of children, the weight of expectation is enormous on them. They've been given this gifted diagnosis, and suddenly they're expected to perform at this continually exceptional level. And they may excel in certain things, but as we're saying, the twice exceptionality, there may be other elements that they're really struggling with, but we kind of go, oh, well, actually, this is sort of where we expect you to be. But mental health is crucial for these students. And are we doing enough? And are some of these students burning out early in the system?
I would actually argue that the bigger problem with mental health is the opposite, is when kids are not
Right.
challenged enough in the
Yes.
system. Uh, of course, you're going to get some kids that perhaps are at risk of burnout because of the weight of expectations. I think I see that the most when kids are in a gifted program with the word gifted in the title, or whatever other word they understand to mean high performing. I think that's when I see kids and parents start to really stress. Oh, I'm in a program now that's got gifted in the title. That must mean I'm gifted, but I'm not really sure what that means. So I think it means, especially if they're basing it off their primary school experience, and this is a high school program, for example, I think it means being better than everybody else in the class, because that's why I think I got in, maybe. Or I think it means doing really well on tests because that's why I think I got in. Or I think it means never needing help because I never, I was always the independent worker in the classroom. So I think it means never asking the teacher questions, never needing help, always finding everything easy. And then that leads to that unhealthy perfectionism, where kids have started to identify the idea of giftedness as these external factors rather than see themselves as a learner who has strategies when they get stuck. And I think that goes right back to our conversation about teaching independence in primary classrooms, because if your gifted child is constantly doing things independently, they're not learning to take risks. They're not learning how to persist when they get stuck, because probably the work is easy enough that they don't get stuck because the teacher doesn't need to go over to them. So I actually do a lot of work with schools that with the parent group where their children have been accepted into a gifted program in high school the following year. So that's what I'm doing at this time of the year, talking in WA with a lot of year 6 parents whose children have been accepted into a gifted program. Because schools are trying to send that message to parents. This program is not about every child getting the top mark. This program is not about everything being easy. And so this is what to expect in this program. This is gifted doesn't mean that you're smarter than everybody else. Gifted means that your brain works differently. This is how the program is going to work. You might not always do well because we've made it challenging. You're going to be okay. All of those. And so that we can say to parents, exactly how the program works, what it is and what it isn't. And we're giving those messages to students as well. So I think that's really important, that if ever students are in a program that has got a particular gifted sort of title, that we don't just assume that the students know why they're there, that we're really having a clear conversation with them, teaching them about their own strengths and weaknesses, and it's okay to have strengths and weaknesses. Teaching them about how to manage challenge when they find things difficult if they've never experienced that before. Teaching about risk-taking, about managing failure, about making mistakes, and mistakes being productive and an important part of the process, and all of those lovely things. But I think, to go back to what I said about that first, I think that's a lesser problem in some ways than the mental health of children who are stuck in classrooms where they're not learning and they feel like, why am I here? What's the point of school? And I meet gifted adults who speak about their schooling experience with venom almost. They're so bitter about having to go through this experience with very few choices, When they got to uni, perhaps they were able to accelerate themselves. They were able to do a double major. They were able to do other things. But in school, they felt like they had to be there lockstep, or even very compliant kids who were doing all the work that they're given, but they're still quietly just really unhappy.
Yeah.
In Australia, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of gifted children being homeschooled.
Yes. Alternative
We're
school
still not
programs.
seeing enough schools accepting or being open to the strategy of acceleration. And so it really breaks my heart, the thought that you've got young people who are desperate to learn, and yet they're sitting in a classroom where they feel like they've got to, I don't know, look after the others or twiddle their thumbs or, go through the motions. I think I've got a family that I've worked with for a few years, and a few years ago, their little boy was in year 2, and he came home to his dad and said, Dad, like, why is my teacher wasting my life? And
Oh.
I know it just breaks my heart. And every time that dad tells that story, I've heard him tell it a few times, you can see it breaks his heart. He gets
Yes.
teary. This is not a parent that's a pushy
No.
parent or whatever teachers sometimes
Yeah.
think. This is a dad and a mum, that they just want their boy to be happy, to love going to school. And that was the moment that they reached out for some help in terms of getting him identified as gifted, looking maybe for another school. They tried to work with that particular school, but some schools just aren't responsive.
I was going to say, a lot of it is
Yeah.
not, I think that's it, isn't it? We can kind of attribute it to often individual, a sort of a class or whatever it would be, but actually it's a system that is unfortunately that bigger overriding system that puts those barriers in place and not, and there's, you're right. I think there's a lot of adults as well who will speak so negatively about their own school experience, and they've then also not been set up to succeed at university level or further. And everyone said, oh, you had so much promise, and and it's because we didn't give them that potential. Or and when we talked a bit about that, being put in with your peers, and we had, I'm not using this terminology like loosely, but the big fish in the pond, and then and kind of people use it very flippantly. Oh, you were a big fish in a little pond, and then you got out there and you were. But we don't actually, I suppose, really focus on that child having the confidence that I'm not always having to compare myself against a benchmark of what you've put in place for me.
Yeah. And that's where, my really always my number one message to teachers in terms of gifted students is make sure they are appropriately challenged right from kindy. And that doesn't mean that they have to be kindy aged and be doing a year 5 program.
No.
There are loads of ways to have a kindy child still doing really rich play, but with advanced materials, if they're ready to read, if they're ready to write, if they're ready to count, all of those things that our gifted kids learn so quickly from a very young age how to tolerate being bored, how to tolerate the fact that they went home today and didn't learn anything. And we can do better than that. And I appreciate that teachers are busy and they need support to do that. Of course they do. But yeah, that I think that's the reason why I keep working, I think, in this area, because I really want more gifted kids to be having a school experience that where they were challenged, they were learning really good social emotional skills around persistence and perseverance, and they feel like they can contribute successfully to the world because they've got those skills and because they're learning and they're engaged with learning and they're loving learning. I think if we can achieve that for more of our gifted kids, we're doing great.
You're right. And that you brought it up before about the opportunity to fail and the challenge, and I think, because then when we see in adult life, a lot of children who weren't the top performing children do really well, but because they have been given the chance to fail and given the chance to be, because they've never had that, maybe often that feeling of success. Whereas we've got these gifted children who sometimes aren't put in that position, so therefore it becomes so overwhelming and really attacks their self of being. So yes, you're right. We need to challenge them and give them those opportunities to say, wow, what does it feel like? We're not getting it right. What are you going to do to push yourself to the next level?
Yeah. And I appreciate, of course, that we come back again to what we talked about before, that some teachers in a mixed ability classroom will hear that and think, I don't want them to need me, like, as in, and I don't mean that in a bad way about teachers. They're just busy. They're thinking, no, like, it's very convenient for teachers to have a group of 5 kids or one child who is working independently, beautifully by themselves, because it means that they feel freed up to work more with other students. So they feel as though it's helping them do their job better. So I appreciate that that's a challenge for some teachers to say, well, we want those gifted kids to need you just as much as the other kids. Of course, a tired, busy teacher is going to think, I don't want them to need me just as much. Are you kidding?
Yes.
So we have to support teachers to make that happen so that there's challenge for kids. I only say that because I don't want to guilt trip teachers to say you should be challenging these kids more when they're thinking, but how? How do I leave the other kids? How do I physically manage the practicalities of my classroom to make that work? And they're the differentiation skills that teachers really need to make that happen.
Definitely. And I think, I know personally from a vulnerability point of view, my area was science. And there was sometimes I had to say to a child, your knowledge and what you're doing is beyond what I know.
Yes.
And I haven't got enough skills to give you what you want. But my goodness, I think you're amazing. And I think what you're doing is incredible. And let's work together. What would you like? Who can I go? And I will try and find that out. But just being a bit vulnerable as a teacher and just saying, wow, some of those things I can't do.
Yeah.
But I
and
need
those
to
teachers
help
are out there. And I do want to acknowledge those teachers that are saying exactly what you've just said, or the teachers that are not sure, but they're really trying, or the teachers that have asked for help and haven't gotten any, but they're still trying and advocating and doing their own research anyway, just on the quiet. And also to acknowledge the school leaders that are really trying to build differentiation skills in their teachers, are differentiating for their teachers and the different things that they need from them. There are some amazing teachers out there that are crying out for a little bit more information or another strategy or a little bit more help. There's so much potential out there amongst our teachers. We want to look after them too.
Definitely. Now, we talk about teachers, and this is obviously the very key message we're getting through today, but we all started with that teacher who maybe helped us get into profession or really inspired us. And there may be more than one, because I know that's very tricky to pinpoint, but who was your favorite teacher and why?
You know what? Even if I hadn't seen this question beforehand, I know who I would have said. Look, I have had some amazing teachers, actually. I had an amazing teacher, a science teacher called Mr. Offer, and I am not a science person. That was not my best subject, but he was just that amazing teacher who knew how to engage kids. But the other teacher I would also mention is a lady called Mrs. Jorgensen, and I think she's passed away now, sadly, but she was my English teacher, and English is my thing. Writing, I love writing, I love reading, I love words. And I'm sure she must have gotten in trouble for as a teacher for going off curriculum with the class. I had her in high school for English. She taught us Chaucer. She taught us Shakespeare when we were a bit too young for some of the things. She taught us Beowulf, and we were learning runes and all these things. And the level of English and analysis that she was doing with us, like I know it wouldn't be for everyone, but as a student who loved words, I loved her class. And I feel like I'm the writer, the speaker, the everything that I am today because she wasn't afraid to go, you guys don't need to do the stuff that all the other kids are doing. You've got that. You know how to write an essay. You know how to do these things. Let's really dive in and get excited. Yes. And she was always passionate, and she always, made sure that we were loving what we were doing. And if we didn't, she'd change it. And I just remember very fondly just being very excited to go to those lessons because I knew it would always be interesting. I knew it would always be something different, and it really influenced the study that I did, when I left school and all of those things. So, I know everyone does have that fabulous teacher, but I think I do want to say as well to any teacher who's listening, you can be that fabulous teacher, and you may not feel like a fabulous teacher, but I bet to one or more kids in your class, you are that teacher. Like teachers are so important in kids' lives. And even if all you are doing is making sure they are in your classroom and they feel safe to be there, and they're not maybe learning anything today, but they're safe. Good on you, because I think sometimes teachers beat themselves up when kids aren't making the right amount of progress, but some kids have tough little lives, and if you're the person that they can relax with for the, for the first time that week, then you are doing an amazing job as a teacher. Yeah.
You're so right. That's showing up for that child and being able to say to them, I'm still here and I'm going to be here.
It's
and I will always be here.
It's worth it. Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
so right. And how
Yeah.
lovely that teacher you were talking about, sort of really just giving you the opportunities to learn about things that you probably wouldn't have delved into. The Shakespeare. And
Yeah.
sometimes you think, even that science teacher, that might not be something that you then go on to pursue in your life or where you go to.
No,
And it might not be the content that you engage with, but it is the teaching and the person
yeah,
who gave you that,
that's
which,
right.
yeah. And we
Yeah.
need to raise our profession. I think that in a time where we often, as we've talked about today,
Yeah.
being portrayed maybe not in the right way as teachers,
That's
it's
right.
the more of us who can raise our
That's right.
voices will only help further.
Exactly. Teaching is complex, teaching is
Yeah.
hard, teaching is exhausting,
Mm.
and yet those teachers are doing it anyway, day
And
in,
yeah,
day out.
and a
Yeah.
brilliant job. We're so lucky.
Yeah.
Well, Kylie, I could speak all day about this, and
Me
and I would
too.
love to do more, and sort of want to shout to people, get Kylie in, it will transform. So we will put to all our listeners some of your details down so people can reach out to you, because I think you're such a valuable resource for so many teachers, so many children, and also so many families and communities that need to have some more expertise in this area. So thank you to all our listeners for listening with us today. We can't wait to speak to you all again on our next part of the series. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been such a pleasure.